Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today we have a special guest. This is the Handy Outdoorsman, also known as my dad. Thanks for coming on.
No problem, son. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, cool. So I think my first question that I'm going to ask you is, how did you get into hunting?
I started getting into hunting. I was probably my I'd say my mid 20s. There was a guy that I worked with. His name was Ken, and he would come into work after the weekend and talk about bow hunting. And it sounded like to be, pretty exciting. So I said, I'd like to do that. And so he invited me out, and I sat with him a couple of times where he was hunting, and he kind of got me into the sport from there. And that was probably back in, I'd say 1987 is when I picked up bow hunting. Now I did do small game a lot prior to that, squirrel, pheasant, things like that. So I did a lot of small game, but I never bow hunted until I met Ken in 1987.
Nice. So when you were hunting with Ken, what kind of equipment were you guys using? Obviously, I'm sure you guys weren't using saddles back then. And
No, saddles were not around. Climbers were at that point in time, climbers were just coming out, and so that was the thing to do. Now back then, you could only hunt from a tree stand in archery season. You couldn't hunt during gun or rifle season. So from a elevated platform, you could only bow hunt from an elevated platform. But back then, yeah, there was still a ground hunting. I hunted from the ground. I think my first 2 years before I even went to a platform or a climber. Ken was using a climber, and so it just took me a couple of years to gather the right equipment to get up to where he was. But getting into the sport, a young father, mother raising kids, you don't have a lot of extras for sporting gear, so you do with what you got. So yeah, I didn't get a tree stand until I think maybe 2 years later.
got it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And now I that's all I want to do. I cannot hunt from the ground. I find it difficult. I'll climb a tree and sit on a branch before I hunt on the ground, because I just like hunting elevated. I can see more, and I feel that I have a better chance.
Sure, I get it. So back then when you were hunting mostly public land?
I was hunting all public land. Yeah, so I think for the first, oh gosh, 8 years, I hunted public land. I never got a chance to hunt private until after you were born. So when a friend of mine, he was building a house, and he needed some help with the electrical and a few other things, and he offered to pay me to do that. And I said, well, let me just hunt your property for one season, and I'll call it good, and I'll do all your wiring. So that's kind of how that deal came about. And I've actually been on that property for over 30 years. Yeah. So it worked out pretty well, just by getting to know somebody. But I hunted my first 8 to 10 years strictly on public land.
Got it. So when did you get your first deer?
I don't know if you recall, but you and your sister were sitting in the gun blind on the property. And so let me set up the scenario. So where I was hunting, it's called the Barrel. It's at the front of my friend's property. And he used to have a 55-gallon drum that would fill up with corn. It was legal debate back then. And at this barrel, there was a gun blind, maybe 20, 30 yards into the woods. And then I was set up across from the gun blind in a tree stand. And so whenever I went hunting, you and your sister always wanted to come with me. And I didn't mind. But I couldn't put both of you in a tree stand, obviously. So I had to put you into the gun blind. And I said, look, I'm right here. You can see me. You look out the window. And that's kind of how that came about. But yeah, so you guys were in the gun blind, and I was in the tree stand. And I remember you telling me you were dozing off, just about ready to kind of nod off. Your sister was already asleep. And then you just happened to hear the bow go off, and you're like, hey, what was that? And that's when you said you weren't asleep, but you said you heard the bow go off. You would have seen the deer if you weren't asleep. So I'll take your story. You weren't asleep, but yeah. So I think you were. I don't remember the ages, but you guys were both young.
Yeah, I think I was 7, I think.
I think so, because I think we'd already been up the property maybe a year or two. Because I know for a fact that you can't. No, so it probably was the next year. So you and when you started coming up to the property was the first year I started hunting it, and you were 6. So that was the next year. So yeah, you were 7. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
I do remember it. Just to let you know, that deer came right by the blind that we were in.
After I shot it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it woke you up when it ran by.
Yeah, that's neither here nor there.
All right. Yeah. It's your story, my story.
Yeah, right. Meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, we'll meet in the middle. Yeah.
So would you say that that's your best hunt you ever been on?
I've had a lot of hunts since then, and though that is very memorable, I will always remember my first deer, and especially that you kids were there. It was very memorable, but um, no, that's not my most memorable. My most memorable is when I got the. Oh gosh, it's hard to say because several of them just kind of pop in my mind real quick. I've had some pretty good adventures. Um, I'd have to say the when I got the 10 point, the first time we were able to gun hunt George's property
Double drop towns?
with the drop tines. Yeah,
Yeah.
that to me was a very memorable hunt. So I don't know if you want me to go into the story with this.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So it was the first time that I was able to hunt the private property during gun season. Prior to that, the owner said you can hunt it all during bow season and it's all yours, but when it comes to gun season, it's mine. Well, it was his property. He could have hunted it anytime he wanted it, but he allowed me to solely bow hunt it. Well, that was the year that he said, I'm not going to be able to go gun hunting. You're able to go. So please go and use the property. So you and I both went up there. And so it was opening day. It was the afternoon hunt. And I heard a shot probably about, I don't know, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and it came from the neighbor's property. And, I heard the shot, and then I thought they were on George's property, but I didn't get down. And then maybe 20 minutes later, I heard a whole bunch of hooping and hollering, here he is, here he is. So they had shot a deer, and I could hear him clearly, like they were down at the base of my tree. And I was like, okay, this hunt's over. I'm done. Because it was like 4 o'clock, and I could hear them, and they're like, oh my gosh, look at him, look at him. So they must have shot a really nice buck. And I was going to get down thinking, well, this hunt's done. But where you were hunting, I would have had to walk past you to get back to the cabin. And I said, well, I don't want to ruin his hunt. So
Right.
I'll just sit here and wait it out. And sure enough, it was probably an hour later. Those guys had left. It got real quiet and then it kind of became what I call prime time. It's just before dark. The woods are kind of becoming active with the deer movement, and I could hear something running behind me, and I knew it was a deer. And then all of a sudden, I started hearing grunting, and I said, "Oh my gosh, buck!" So I waited, and then a doe ran right out in front of me. And normally, I'm not very patient. I probably would have taken the doe. But because I heard this buck coming, I said, all right, I'm going to wait. And sure enough, like, I don't know, maybe it seemed like 10 minutes, but it was only probably 4. 4 minutes later, this 10 point just kind of walks right in and bumps the doe, and she runs off, and he stands where she was. And I don't know, it was probably 15 yards. And so I shot it, and it ended up being the biggest buck I've ever taken.
So for those of you who don't know, this happened in the infamous cranberry bog. That's what we call that spot, is the cranberry bog, and the biggest deer that have ever been taken off of that property have all come out of that spot.
Out of that spot. Yeah, I don't know what makes that spot such a deer attractant, because there's no natural bedding in the area, there's no food source, but there's trails that cut through this section of the property where if you do not see a deer within at least a day, 2 days, then then there's no deer on the property whatsoever. The trail cams are always full, so
And we're not sitting on a overly populated piece of property either.
no, it's 80 acres, and it's surrounded by other private land, but none of it is agricultural. It's just wooded lots.
Mhm.
That particular spot on that property has produced more deer than anywhere else. Yeah, I would agree. The cranberry bog is the hot spot.
Especially this year, because how it's been, what, 5 years since they did the bait ban, and
No, it's not even been. It hasn't been that. It's this. This is the second year.
it feels like 5, huh?
Well. Let's put it this way. There's been bait restrictions for probably 8 to 10 years, where you can only put out 2.5 gallons, a 10 by 10 area. So it seems like a long time for you for bait restrictions. But there's been no baiting the last 2 years, but that hasn't impacted the travel in the same area again.
Well, that was going to be my point, is just like you said, there's nothing to bring them into that area. They're just always there. I mean,
Yeah.
you told me this year when I came up and you're like, hey, you should hunt the cranberry bog. And I was like, I'm not hunting the cranberry bog, like
Yeah.
there's nothing. It's just like what we're talking about now. There's nothing out there.
But
And I saw what, 8 deer out there in 3 days.
that's it, right? I don't know what it is. I mean, but I'm not complaining, because I know that at least hunting there, I'm gonna see a deer, and in a lot of times, just seeing a deer makes the hunt. It encourages me to
Sure.
get back out, and there's times that a deer will come within range, but where I am now as a hunter, I'll let them walk. Whereas, before, when I was just beginning, there's a deer, I need meat, but now I still love the chase, but I'm willing to let more walk than I used to.
Sure.
It's just over time, I've learned a lot more, and I've gotten to be a little bit more patient.
Absolutely. I get it.
So,
So-
and just to go back to the story. So the reason we call this the cranberry bog, it's probably the size of a football field. And in this only spot on the property, the size of a football field, are some very, very hard red berries. They're not cranberries, but they're hard like cranberries. And I don't know what kind they are. And so when we try to identify different spots on the property, we kind of give it different names. Like a moment ago, I said the barrel. Well, that's the stand that has the barrel. The cranberry bog is, well, where the berries are. So we've got different spots we call that we reference. Oh, where'd you hunt tonight? Or what'd you see in this spot? So that's why we give names, so we know where somebody's hunting.
And that's the cool thing about growing up on that property and using it so much, is that, growing up, we only had one stand, and that was the barrel.
Oh,
And then
yeah. When
slowly
first
we started adding more and more stands, and we started to understand the wind a little bit better and where they're coming from. And so how many stands do we got now?
Oh, I think we probably have 5, maybe 6. But
Yeah.
you bring up a good point. So when I first started hunting, and my friend Ken was helping me to get into hunting, what I learned from him is maybe the equipment aspect of it. You need a bow, you need the right clothes, you need a climber or something of that nature. So he really helped me with what I needed to hunt, but I can't say he taught me how to hunt. So when I got access to the property through my friend George, he had a friend that lived there, and his name was Cecil. And he was probably, he was in his mid 60s when I met him. And early 60s when I met him. And so from him, I was able to learn how to hunt, the wind, and then how to pattern deer, as well as stand placement and things like that. You know, where to look for scrapes and rubs. So over the years, I had different people who would help me, I guess, in different aspects of hunting. So Ken helped me with what I needed, and then Cecil helped me with how to do it. So you're right. When we first started hunting the property, we hunted that one stand, the barrel, for, I don't know, 3-4 years before we kind of even adventured off anywhere else. It's just, that's what I knew and that's what I did. So, but as I learned from other people who were willing to teach me, I learned to expand that. So now I know how to go into a piece of property and judge it based upon, where I think the deer or how the deer are moving, the wind, food source, water, different things like that. So yeah, it's been a long-term learning thing, and I'm still learning different things. So
Sure. So with that, I know you talked about the mentor thing, but if someone's trying to get into hunting and it's like you said, like you need the bare basics, how would you go about that? What kind of equipment would you use? Where would you go get it? What would your advice be to anybody who's trying to get into hunting and they don't necessarily have, you know, family that grew up hunting?
sure. So, and that's a good question, is, because I didn't grow up in a hunting family. My brother and I said earlier that I did some small game, and that's because our neighbor, he was into small game, and he took us out a couple of times and kind of got us started. But my dad or my uncles, none of them ever hunted. And so I only hunted what I knew, and the neighbor only small game hunt. So that's all I did. But to get into it, if you're interested, just like I was telling you that Ken came in and told stories, and I was interested, and I asked him, hey, what's it take to get into this? So don't be afraid to ask questions to somebody or someone that hunts, and just say, I'm interested in doing this. I don't want to take away from your hunts, but give me some tips, give me some ideas, and don't be afraid to ask, hey, do you mind if I go and with you, so I can kind of see what this is about. Now keep in mind, when you go, you might want to just take paper and pencil and write down all your questions, instead of during the hunt ask all these questions, because you're going to take away from that person's hunting right then and there, and they're there to show you. So just take notes, and then later have that conversation with them and say, hey, I got this question, I got that question. And don't spoil it for the guy so he won't take you back out. But and with that, just, you don't need the latest and greatest equipment to get into the sport. A lot of people frown upon secondhand equipment when, oh, you should go out and buy new, get it custom for you. If you can't afford it, that's okay to go to a pawn shop and try and find something that's close to what you need for your fit, your draw length, and different things like that. I would visit a pro shop just to have somebody properly tell you what you need. And then you can go from there and go buy something used. You don't need the latest and greatest to go out there and enjoy the sport.
It's true. Yeah. So I think with the way that you hunt, and I know you said that you were passing on deer and things like that, how would you judge whether or not the deer you just killed is going to go on your wall?
I used to think it was so I had this 10 point we call the drop tine. I had that mounted because it was my biggest deer at the time. And then I said, well, my next deer has got to be bigger than this in order for me to put it on the wall. And then the next deer was bigger that I put on the wall. I got a couple in between then, but it was bigger. But then the deer I got after that one was smaller actually than my drop time deer. So it wasn't my biggest one, but the story behind it had so much meaning to me that getting it mounted for the story alone was worth it. So, you and I both have had this conversation a couple of times. What's wall mountable to a person? Well, that's specifically to that person. Nobody else can tell you, well, don't get that mounted. It's not worth it. But if it's worth it to you for the memories, just because it was special to you, then go ahead. It's your mount. You're paying for it. You're not asking somebody else to pay for it. It's your money. And if there's a story behind it, or you feel like it's worthy of it, get it mounted.
I don't see any taxidermists turning that down either.
Well, that's it. I mean, they may come in and say, nice buck, but at the same time, they might be thinking kind of small, but it's up to you. I mean, I know a couple of guys that have gotten does mounted, because the story behind it was something that, that's a story that I want to remember. And by getting this mounted, I'll always remember that.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So you're talking about stories and things like that and things you'll remember. Do you have like a unique hunting story that happened to you, or a funny story out in the woods?
Where do I begin? Oh my gosh. So, all right. So I'll tell it this way. So every deer that I've had mounted and put on the wall, I've got a short name for it. So we know I told you the story about the noisy neighbors, and this 10 point came in. So that deer is known as the noisy neighbor. Well, then I have another one that it's not mounted, but I have it just the horns on the wall. I call it the Walmart buck. And the reason for that is, so this is the first year that I switched over to hunting with a crossbow. And because it was new to me, my setup, I was trying to get everything ready like I would with my compound bow. I actually kept my broadheads in a separate container than in a quiver. And it was because I was practicing all summer with field tips, but I had broadheads for the crossbow. And when I was getting ready to pack up, I knew they were in a separate container. And so I pulled them out of my hunting gear. They weren't in the case with the crossbow. I pulled them out of my hunting gear and I sharpened them. And then I put them on the kitchen counter or the kitchen table. And as I'm packing things up, I got everything and I knew I had the broadheads, but I thought I had packed them. What ended up happening is your mom coming through and saying, oh, this doesn't belong here. Let me go put it on Dad's workbench. So she put them downstairs. And when I looked at it, I said, oh, I already packed those. So when I go to the woods and
2 hours north.
2 hours north, I'm 2 hours away, I'm unpacking everything. And I didn't quite think about it when I was walking out to the tree stand, but I get all set up. I literally walked out to the tree stand with my crossbow. And then I go to hang it up in the tree and I'm looking at it and I'm like, where's my broadheads? Where's my broadheads? And that's when it dawned on me, oh, they're on the kitchen table. Did I pack them? So I'm like, well, I can't shoot a deer with a field tip. So I get down and I'm thinking, okay, I'm done because I don't have any broadheads. I go walk all the way back to camp, and it's probably, I don't know, 20 minutes back to camp. It wasn't that far. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, it's only 3 o'clock. Walmart's 20 minutes away. Let me run into Walmart real quick. So I ran into Walmart. It's 20 minutes in one direction. So I ran in there. I bought some new broadheads and then I drove back. That's another 20 minutes. And by the time I unpack everything and get it up, we're an hour later. And I finally get up into the tree stand. And the funny thing is when I walked in the first time, I was hunting the barrel. I spooked a couple of deer off the barrel. The second time I come in, same thing. I spook a couple of deer off the barrel. I said, well, this is not going to go well. And I sat there, and sure enough, maybe about 40 minutes later, I had a group of bucks come in, a bachelor pad come in from a group of I was probably maybe 3, maybe 4 bucks come in, and I shot a nice 8 point out of that bachelor group. So it, I call it my Walmart buck for that reason alone. So I mean, that's one funny story that people look at me and say that didn't happen. Yeah, it did. I ran into Walmart, had to buy some broadheads, and came back. So
Yeah, it's funny how that all works out, huh?
I'm glad it did. I really am. I'm glad I stuck it out and said, I'm going back out anyway. And, look what happened.
Right. And I think you got that one on film, right?
Yeah, that was my first filmed hunt. Yeah, you got a good memory. So yeah, I actually have that hunt on film. So check out on my channel. I don't remember what year it was, but yeah, I've got that hunt on film.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool. I don't think you got the shot on film, but that big G2 buck that you got.
Right. So that was, I think, 2 years later. And on this particular buck, I had actually shot a doe the night before. And I shot it at the back of the property. I wasn't hunting the cranberry bog. And so I said, okay. So I filled my doe tag, and I said, I won't go out in the morning because I've already driven the 3-wheeler through the property. I said, I won't go out. And your mom said, well, go out. You don't know what you're gonna see. I said, I'm not gonna see anything. I already got a deer. I'll sleep in. And then she goes, well, just go out and see what you can see. And then I'm sure you're gonna see something. And sure enough, I think should have been a 12 point, but he ended up being a 9-pointer because he had a couple of broken off tines. But yeah, that buck came in, and I had no intentions of going out that morning. But he came in chasing a doe, and she actually scared me because I didn't even hear her. And the next thing I know, she just kind of like quickly ran 5 yards, 6 yards from the base of my tree, and I'm looking straight down at her, and all I can hear behind me, "Rah, rah, rah, rah." I heard this guy coming, but my bow's hanging up, and I'm like, okay, she's right here, he's coming behind me. How am I going to do this? And so I mean, I was a sloth. I was just moving ever so slowly because I didn't want to spook her and her run off, and then this
Right.
guy run right past and me not get a shot. But yeah, he ended up coming basically the same spot she did. It's just like the other one, and I shot him. Oh gosh, 7 yards from the base of the tree. It's pretty close. So needless to say, he didn't go far. But yeah, that was my biggest buck. That is my biggest buck up to this day.
But I thought it was cool because I think that was the second deer you got on tape, and it was
Well,
cool.
no, I didn't get this one on tape.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. How you were able to walk up with it with the camera.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? Like it was cool to have that
cover.
first initial impression. You're like,
Yeah.
hey, this is my first time walking up, and I don't think you thought it was going to be that big.
Oh, I didn't think
You
it
know?
would be that big because even though I was moving slowly, I was so concentrated on not scaring that doe that, I mean, I could see the buck coming or standing over here out of my peripheral, but I really didn't size him up to say. I could see for sure he was a, he had some height on him, but I didn't realize he was going to be as big as he is.
Sure.
And so I didn't really get a good look at him until I walked up on him, and man, he was a nice sized buck.
I think
Because
that was
even
right.
when
That was
even
right
when I
before I was supposed
shot
to go
him,
to Korea.
what's that?
That was right before I was supposed to go to Korea, and we got one trail cam picture of him.
Right. No, you
And
were in Korea. You
yeah.
were in
Well,
Korea.
hold on. I got the whole month of October off because I
Oh,
took leave, and that's when I got that doe opening day, and then I got the 4-point like a week later,
a week later,
and then
yep.
we got the picture. We got one trail cam picture at like 11 o'clock of your deer that you got.
Yeah. And that was
And
the
so I
only
was hunting
trail
that
cam I
back
got
stand
of.
constantly,
Yeah.
constantly. And then you guys, we went back downstate. You dropped me off at the airport, went to Korea. It was my first shift, and you sent me a picture of that
I
deer.
got him a couple days after you. Yeah, I think it was a couple days after.
You went up the next weekend and you got him.
Yeah, I remember that. But you know what? We got trail cams of him in the back, but he ended up being in the cranberry bog again. And that spot is a hot spot. So
Yeah. And I know over at the like our property, I know you're trying to get a food plot established over there, and I
Right.
think you're on year two.
This is my second year on the food plot, and I'm no farmer. I'll admit that. I definitely can't farm. But our soil is up there is so acidic. The pH balance is horrible, and so it's taking quite a bit to kind of get the pH level to where it needs to be. To get a good food plot going, you need to kind of be in the 6, 7 range as far as a pH level. We were at 4, so we had quite a bit to do. So it's coming along slowly, not as fast as I would like for it to be, but I also know that in order for it to become a good food plot, it's just going to take some time. And for 2 years, it's getting better. The first year, it was horrible, and this last year was really good. But what I planted was the wrong stuff, and so as soon as the first frost came in, it kind of killed everything, and I didn't have anything else that would withstand the frost. So I didn't have any food in the food plot come hunting season when it got cold for rifle. Early bow season was good, but I was down there in Illinois with you, and
Right.
so by the time I came back here, the frost had come and killed the crop. So I got to just learn a few more things. But yeah, putting in the food plot has been a learning experience for sure.
I know that's one of your goals, but do you have any other goals for this upcoming year for hunting?
Um, I do want to. So I did put up an elevated hunting platform over the food plot because I'm going to stick with it until I actually get it to actually grow something long term. And so with that elevated platform, I want to put in a gun blind, and a fairly nice gun blind, because when you and I come up, it we like to hunt together. We don't necessarily have to split and do our own thing. We like to hunt together and tell stories, as well as when your mom and sister comes up, it'll be a nice place for them. They're not outdoors people, but they like the outdoors. And if I could have some place where they could sit comfortably and come out with a hunt with me once or twice, yeah, it'll be worth it. So yeah, I want to build a really nice gun blind on the property.
I remember you saying that you wanted to build the platform. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Saw your video and everything. But once you actually get out there and you see that platform, that's a platform. And for
It,
you to put all that up by yourself,
yeah,
I can't believe it.
it was challenging. I admit it was challenging, but it was fun at the same time. It's like, well, can I do this? And yeah, it's 14 feet high from the ground to the base, and then it's 8 by 8. So it's large. It is large, but I have plans for that, so it's not going to be wasted. But you're right. It is. When you walk up on you're kind of like almost losing your hat looking over because it is so tall. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
It's
got
it's
plans.
solid though. It looks
Oh,
good.
it's
It feels
solid.
good. And
Yeah.
once you actually build that blind up there, that'll be
Well, that's the
a
other
nice
reason why
spot.
I made it so solid in the base, is that I plan on putting something on there that's also going to be heavy. And so I wanted to make sure, I have a tendency of overbuilding stuff, but in this particular case, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, especially 14 feet up.
Yeah, well, 14 feet up, you're right. Yeah,
Yeah. All right, I won't hold you up too much, but this will be my last question.
sure.
So when it comes to your weapons of choice, what do you use for archery, and what's your preferred gun?
Um, well, I own a compound bow and I own a crossbow, and I shoot them both, and I like them a lot. Um, when it's, geez, um, I'd have to say over the last 2 to 3 years, I've really liked shooting the crossbow. I think it's a lot easier with my eyesight kind of deteriorating. It's a lot nicer shooting through a scope than trying to line up pins and line it up with the deer. Um, and you know, I know there's some people who are for it, some that are against it. Again, be your own hunter. As long as you're doing things legally and ethically, nobody can tell you, this is wrong or that's right. You have to do what's right for you, as long as it's morally and ethically, legally right.
Sure.
So I like the crossbow. I'll say the crossbow for sure. And then during rifle season, I shoot a Remington 783 308 caliber. I think it's a perfect weapon. I've shot probably 5, 6 deer. Well, I've shot a couple with yours because you had it first.
Mhm.
So I don't think when you went to Dubai, I think you left me your rifle and I used it. I said, "Oh, this is a nice rifle." So I ended up getting one myself, and yeah, I like it. It's it's a great weapon. It's accurate, and it's got more than enough power to knock a deer down. I've never had a track a deer shooting it with the 783. They've just all dropped. So,
Nice.
but yeah, and then you know it's nice to have a muzzle loader if you want to get into late season. So that's the nice thing about Michigan is that the hunting season starts October 1st and it goes until January 1st. Now it's not as long as some other states, but here I think it's great. It's a good time. But you've got archery season that rolls into gun, that rolls into muzzle loader, and now they've got late doe season that goes almost to the end of January. So you've got a good 4 months of solid hunting. So yeah, it's
Are
good.
you a fan of that late doe season?
I am, and the reason is that where they have the late doe season, it's in a lot of populated areas. And here in our tri-county area, the population is just massive, and so they're doing this to try and control the herd, because the number of car accidents along the freeway is it's growing and growing every year. So yeah, I don't have a problem with that. They're just trying to control the herd. It just extends the season. It's after breeding season, so if any of them were pregnant, that's going to help with the herd as well. It'll control that. Some people find it controversial, but I just see it as a way the DNR is trying to control the herd. So
Sure.
yeah, I'm all right with it.
Cool. Cool. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you doing this, Dan.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. It's a great honor for you to ask me to be on your channel and to kind of ask me about these things, though we've probably talked about 3/4 of the stuff we already talked about through different conversations that we've had. And I truly enjoy having you as my hunting partner. I couldn't ask for a better partner. You've been a good example to look up as well. I mean, I'll never hunt from a saddle like you do. It's just something I can't get into, but yeah, you keep me motivated, and as well, you're keeping me young. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dad. It's nice to have this as something to reflect on,
There you go.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to you, son.
All right. See ya.
Bye.